Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express-News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
business editor Greg Jefferson.
And the biggest news in San Antonio politics over the last few weeks, in fact, came last Thursday when Bexar County Commissioner Kevin Wolff announced that after 3 terms, he will not seek reelection next year to the Commissioner's Court. And we are, rather than having us just sit around, kind of spitballing about why he's made that decision, we thought that the smarter thing would be to invite Kevin Wolff on, and he was nice enough to agree to join us. Kevin Wolff, thank you so much for being present.
Pleasure to be here.
Well, you've talked a lot about this over the past few days, but I think one of when we were talking the other day, you mentioned that this is something you had actually been giving some thought to for as many as 4 years. Is that right?
Sure. Yeah. I tell folks, and some of you have heard this before. I kind of grew up on the sidelines of this, and while I was proud of my father serving in the House and Senate and later mayor and council, those types of things, I kind of grew up knowing that there was no way I was ever going to serve in office, and managed to stay out of that until sometime after 40, when we moved back. My family and I moved back from Manhattan, and we had a couple council people get indicted and convicted for bribery, and that was the straw that broke this camel's back. And this is my hometown, and so I felt a need to run, and I did. I certainly didn't think I would be in it for 15 years. But I've been very honored and proud to have served, and that kind of goes back to, I guess, the way I was raised and those types of things. I think everybody has a duty to give back to their community in some form or fashion. I don't care how you do that. You can do that through your church. You can do that through a charity, those types of things. I did that, in my mind, by serving in office, and before that, serving in the military for my country. So while I didn't think I'd be in this line of work, I ended up in it. I like to think we got some good things done, and there's no, one reason why I decided that it's time to move on. There's a number of things. You're right. I have thought about it for quite some time, and from a timing standpoint, this is the right time for me. My daughter just finished her undergrad and has moved back home after being away for 4 years. My wife and I have downsized, and to quite frankly, look at it, there's a price you pay for this type of life. And the elected is not the only one that pays that price. So does their family. And so this is a good time for me to concentrate on them and get back to work and do some business.
During your close to 11 years on the Commissioner's Court, you've served that entire time, of course, with your dad, County Judge Nelson Wolff. Curious what his response was when you broke the news to him.
It was, first off, let me say, having the opportunity to serve with Dad has been, a double-edged sword. That I think it's good because we understand each other very well. It has been trying sometimes because we don't always agree, but then I kind of think about it, what father and son always agree anyway? So ours just happened to be in the public light. Mm-hmm. So, but it's been my pleasure to serve with them. What was his reaction when I told him that I was thinking about doing this? Well, obviously he's much more experienced at this than I am. And we all, I think, have the thoughts of, man, it sure would be nice to be out of the public eye at some point. And so he was very sensitive to that and saying, you know what, yeah, maybe this is a good move for you and your family and those types of things. On the, I guess, more selfish side of things, he's enjoyed having me on Commissioner's Court. And while we disagree from time to time, the reality is local politics is what I call the nuts and bolts of governance. They're not really partisan issues. Nobody cares about a pothole. They just want the damn thing fixed, right? It's not left or right. So I think on the more selfish side of things, he will miss having me as a more often than not ally on the court and getting good things done. But I think overall, as a dad, he's very happy for me.
Yeah. So when I saw the headline on Josh's story last week, just saying you're not running for re-election, my first thought was, okay, well, he's just preparing to run for county judge. He's kind of clearing the decks for that. But I read the story, and it's like I kind of came away convinced that Yeah, actually, you really are leaving government, at least for the time being. But I mean, it was no secret that you were looking very seriously at the county judge's seat for a long time. What changed?
Sure. So, and actually I apply this sort of philosophy, not just being in an elected office, but also in the business sector and in life in general. When you choose a particular career path, you set goals for yourself, and you say, I want to do this. I want to go on from covering City Hall to being the business editor of the paper, whatever those types of things. And you look for those opportunities, and you try to set yourself up for those opportunities. Therefore, in answer to your question, was I, as an elected individual, looking towards the potential future, whether that be a county judge, whether that be a run for Congress, which we toyed with, those types of things. And could I see myself in one of those roles and doing what I hope to be a good job? The answer is yes. However, you have to couple that with, everything else in your life. What have you been able to do or not do for your family? What have you been able to do or not do for yourself? What did you give up when you decided to, get out of the business life after 20, 25 years and get into the public life, and balance those things out? So I can tell you definitively that, my intention is as simple as I've said it is. I'm getting out of this life. I'm going to move back into the private sector. That doesn't mean that somewhere down the line, if situations are correct, I don't know, think back to when I first ran. We had a couple council people who, really did some stupid things. And that was enough for me at that point in my life to say, hey, I got to do something. I can sit on the sidelines and complain about it, or I can get in the game and try to do something about it. So I can't say definitively that, I certainly don't want anything like that to happen in our community, but I can't say definitively that there won't be something in the future that spurs me to run for a county judge or something like that. I don't anticipate that, but I certainly can't cut that off.
Yeah. Now, with the likelihood that your dad's not going to run again, and I know he said this, but I think he said it.
Yeah, he said it. He said it to me last time too.
So. Yeah, he did. And he changed his mind, or maybe he just forgot. He said,
or maybe he just forgot. Who knows?
So you've got that. You're leaving, and I mean, I would imagine that the court has a really different feel with Paolo Elizondo with his passing a year ago. I mean, think ahead a couple of years from now. I mean, what's going to happen with Commissioner's Court? What direction do you think it's likely to take?
Yeah, so obviously the dynamic on court changed considerably with Paul's passing. I think the judge did a really good job in selecting Justin, who I think has been an outstanding public servant. Again, philosophically, he and I are on different sides of the aisle, but I got to serve with him briefly on council, so I already had a relationship with him there. I'd seen the things that he'd done as a state legislator, and so I can tell you that him joining the court, I think, has been a good thing and will be a good thing. And so while it has changed the dynamic somewhat, I think overall we're still moving forward as a body. When you ask me to project forward, I'm a little worried about that. I don't know who will be taking my place. I don't know how that's going to change the dynamics of this new court. I do know it will change it. Hopefully it will be positive, but we'll wait and see. That's, it will probably be those things that ultimately allow the judge to make some sort of final decision. Okay, is this really his last term, or does he feel the need to stay and do more? I obviously can't answer those. You have to ask him, and I will tell you at this point, he probably can't answer that because we don't know what happens after this next election cycle.
Now, just one more, and I'll cut it off. So, not to dominate or anything.
Greg likes to hear himself talk.
Yeah, I do. I'm just going to irresponsibly throw a name out there,
sure,
not based on anything. Is there anything about John Courage seeking the seat? Have you heard?
That is one of the few names I have not heard.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Okay. Who have you heard that?
Oh my God, the list is long. Gilbert mentioned a few of them in his article, but just running off the top of my head, there's Jeannie Wright, former judge; Celeste Brown, former judge; Mike Lackey, current Sarah board member; Jonathan Gerwitz, former colleague of y'all's. There's William Raba. I've heard that name. I've heard Mitch Meyer, who I think was the Hay Street Bridge piece. So,
and by the way, Mitch Meyer told me he'd been waiting 2 years. He's been taking 2 years for this, and so when you made that announcement Thursday, he may have been the happiest person in Bexar County. I don't know.
I didn't realize I was going to make so many people happy.
Yeah, well. Have you heard anything about John Clamp? I haven't.
I've heard his name mentioned. I haven't heard anything from John.
Former councilman.
But you are the only Republican on Commissioner's Court, and we talked about this last week,
right.
But wanted to know if you could expand on it a little bit today. You said that this isn't about a blue wave election. Could you expand on why you think that?
So, you guys talk a lot, correctly so, about how we gerrymander at the state level. And when we look across the nation, for that matter, we see how districts are drawn to lean one way or another. Well, guess what? That happens at the local level as well. I can tell you, shortly after I was elected in 2010, when we had to redistrict just like everybody else does, I had this grand plan. Precinct 4 was as close to a toss-up as possible. So I had to shed 75,000 voters. I was the only precinct that had to shed voters. So I put forward a plan that would take a whole bunch of my voting precincts on the eastern border and move them over into Precinct 4 and make it even more of a toss-up. Well, my Democratic colleagues are no dummies, and they saw that immediately. And so Paul took a bunch of my every blue, purple, and some red precincts on my western side of the district and moved them into his, and then moved some of his into Chico's, and moved some of Chico's into Atkinson's, right? And so Precinct 3 went from 67% Republican to 72% Republican. Yeah. So you talk about blue wave. There was probably the biggest blue wave ever was when President Obama was elected in 2008. Right. The same year I was elected to Commissioner's Court. Mm-hmm. The same year I had a known, well-liked Democrat run against me, a former colleague, Chip Haas. Mm-hmm. All right. I was one of 2 Republicans in the entire county to get elected. And it didn't matter about the blue wave. And I think I won that race by something like 22 points. So, that played no decision factor. It's going to be held by a Republican unless, and this is quite possible based on party politics, the Republicans do something silly in the primary and elect somebody that is just, quite frankly, unelectable.
Right. And along those lines, I mean, you're a Republican, but I've always seen you as kind of an independent Republican. Yeah. I remember a couple of years back, for instance, you took on the state party leadership, Dan Patrick and others, over the property tax, tightening the property tax caps because you thought it was infringing on local control. Yeah. And I think in June you wrote a letter critical of the way Bexar County Republican Chair Cynthia Brem was kind of throwing out accusations of impropriety in the mayoral election. Did you? And I know this wasn't the main factor for you, but did you anticipate getting primaried by maybe having a serious Republican opponent?
No, I've always kind of taken it as a given that somebody's going to try to primary me, and most of the time they have. I think last cycle there was a guy by the name of Kerner who had worked for Senator Cruz, and so no, that's always been sort of a given in my mind that I would draw some sort of primary opponent. More than likely, it would be the further right you get, the higher the likelihood it goes. And so, that didn't, for want of a better term, scare me. I fully expected it. I was just waiting for, a name to emerge at some point, and I'm sure it will now. So, to your point, yes, call me, the far right calls me a rhino, others call me, a centrist, whatever you want to call me, fine, I get it. The reality is that in my mind, I'm that traditional sort of Republican that is, about less government, less taxing, those types of things, and that's where I've kept my focus.
Now, given that, we're seeing a lot of polarization, and it started at the federal level, but it really does. You just look at the mayor's race.
Yes.
It's coming down to the local level also,
which, by the way, is very, very unfortunate. But
it's
true.
But has anybody approached you and said, "Come on, man, hang on, run again"? For fear of what might, of the kind of Republican who might take your place. So, more ideologically driven.
There's been a couple folks that have said, no, please don't, and I appreciate that sentiment. But I also have to say this is fairly new news. And yes, the phone was blowing up over the past few days to the point where my wife and daughter took my phone away this weekend. And so the direct answer to your question, Greg, is that there has been some volume of that, but not a great amount. I don't know if that'll change, as we get further along.
How about a totally unfair question? Are you proud to be a Republican these days?
Wow, I am very proud to be the type of Republican I am, and I like to, for want of a better term, I like to think I'm a what I call a rational Republican. Here's the reality, and we see this, at all levels of government. Politics happens at the extremes. That's where everybody makes the noise, and that's what makes the news, those types of things. But true governance happens in the middle. And the problem that we have at all levels of governance is that those that choose to fight from the middle essentially are fighting on two fronts. You're fighting whatever party you're a member of and the extremes in that party, and you're fighting the opposite party.
That's very true.
It's a tough role, and unfortunately, and you guys have heard me say this before, there's a big difference between running for office and then actually doing the office if you get elected. And so, my opinion is more often than not, we elect a bunch of people that are good at running for the office, but don't have a damn clue how to do the office when they get elected.
Well, along those lines, talking about policy and doing the job, transportation was a big issue
Huge.
For you. And if you could you share this story, because I think it's a great story. I think it was January 2014, Ted Houghton, who was then the chair of the Texas Transportation Commission, made a big announcement. It's going to be $825 million highway project. Can you talk a little bit about some of what led up to that announcement and the role that you played in it?
How the sausage gets made a little bit? Okay. The short version is 6 months before that announcement ever took place, myself, the county judge, county manager, were in a meeting with Ted up in Austin. And it was where senior staff was presenting to us what might be next for Bexar County. From TxDOT's perspective. And as they were going through the presentation, it was this huge PowerPoint thing, and I got a little bored, and I asked the chairman if I could borrow his whiteboard. And he said, sure. So, I got up there, and I drew a picture of 1604 and 35 and 281 and Bandera and Highway 90, and then I got out colors. This would be toll, this would be non-toll, that kind of thing.
What were their facial expressions while you were drawing all this?
The staff was like, who the hell is this guy? Ted was interested in it, but I finished the map and I turned around. I said, Mr. Chairman, this is what we need to do. And he turns around back to his planning staff and they flip through it, and one of them says, well, Mr. Chairman, that kind of looks like our plan 4, And the chairman says, okay, we're done here. And so, the judge and I, the county manager, we get back, we're driving back to San Antonio, and the judge is like, what the hell just happened? And I'm like, hell, I don't know, but it sounded good. Let's see. 3 months later goes by, we get called to another meeting up there. This time we're waiting in the waiting room, and 2 board members from VIA and ATD walk in. I've got the RMA there represented by the county manager, assistant city manager and a council person, Ray Lopez, walk in, and we're all looking at each other saying, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? We go back into that same conference room, and I look over, and the map I'd drawn there 3 months ago is still up there, and it says, do not erase. Ted Houghton. All right. And Ted turns to me and he goes, Commissioner, you want to tell us what it is we're going to do? And I'm like, okay. So I get up and I start talking about it, and then the brand new district director, Mario Orge, who's our current district director, he gets up there with me, and on the other whiteboard, we start putting together numbers because transportation's uber complicated. TxDOT has 12 categories of funding. Some you can use on some things, some not.
Right.
And we were sitting up there, and that's where we came up with $825 million out of, like, I don't know, 7 or 8 different funds to do what you see already happening today. All that work you see on 1604, some of the work you see taking place on I-10 and 281.
The 281 North.
281 North, yeah. Those were parts of it. So, sometimes it ain't pretty how the sausage gets made, but that's also what I call doing the real work of the job. Is being able to dig in and understand how the technicalities and the tactical things you have to do in doing this job in order to actually get things done.
It's a good thing you weren't just screwing around on the whiteboard.
Exactly. Yes.
Who knows what kind of projects we'll be seeing right now?
Who knows what we'd have in store? I mean,
Well, I'm curious to get your take because you'll not be part of the 2020 election cycle as a candidate, but I know that like us, you're going to be observing it closely. And, as Josh was pointing out, there's a lot of talk about a blue wave happening. And particularly when you look at Texas, because the question is Texas in play in the presidential contest? Are we going to see some, state legislative seats flip? And, it's early, but what do you see happening?
So sticking to the skill set of running for office, I would definitively tell my party they better get their act together. For whatever reason, we've done a very poor job of you've heard the terms before, expanding the tent and those types of things. Which, quite honestly, if you stick to what I believe core Republicanism is, it should be able to expand the tent quite a bit. Do I see danger in the Republican Party losing its control of the state? The answer is yes. We've seen that take place in the state in the past, not necessarily between Republican and Democrat, but between blue dogs and yellow dogs.
Right.
Okay. Matter of fact, I think you wrote a book on that, and so you see those sort of sea changes happening. Could that be happening today? This time between R&D? The answer is yes, and we seem to compound the problems by I don't know, stupid things. The only, you've heard me say this before, the only thing you get riding a fence is a sore ass. Okay, well, that's what our speaker did. Our speaker did a good job in this last session of pushing back against certain factions, the far right, et cetera, and getting some good work done. But then he went and killed himself when he tried to make friends with them again, in the proverbial backroom cigar smoking place.
That Empower Texans
That's right,
meeting.
Right.
Do you think he's going to survive, by the way?
No.
Yeah.
No, I think he'll be lucky to survive retaining a seat, much less a speaker position. So, but those types of actions only deteriorate and hurt the party as a whole. At the local level, it's exactly what I meant when I sent that letter about Cynthia Brim. I mean, this lady is a complete embarrassment to the party. You asked me earlier, am I proud to be a Republican? I ain't proud to be part of that.
That's the kind of thing I had in mind.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, do you think there's anybody of your sort of temperament still left in the party? I mean, is there any room for somebody who thinks of themselves as not strictly a partisan and more about doing the work?
I think there are. In fact, I would tell you this. I think the majority of people that we elect to office want to be rational. Okay? The problem is having the intestinal fortitude once you're there to remain rational. So the example I can give is Governor Abbott. Okay? Governor Abbott, I think, is much more rational than Lieutenant Governor Patrick. However, I think the politics forced him to chase Patrick's tail. Rather than leading, he felt he was, fighting that
because that's where the base was, or
that's
the perception
right.
was.
That's right. And so I think that's where we who are in this line of work, we go in, forget what side of the aisle you're on. We go in with the best intentions. And this is one of the things that ultimately made me decide not to run for Congress. I spent a lot of time up there talking to our local electeds on both sides of the aisle, and almost without fail, I truly felt that all of them want to do good stuff. but they always ended their conversation with, I can't get anything done. And so to sum up your question, I'd like to think, the optimist in me likes to think that the majority of people we elect absolutely have the right intentions. The problem is that once they get there, they've got to nut up and stick with those intentions. Otherwise, you get trapped in the extremes and the politics of it, and you forget about actually the governance of it.
Well, I think on that note, we will wrap up this week's show. Kevin Wolff, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck to you with your last, you have about 15 months in office and your post-political
Still
career.
Got plenty of time to mess things up. So, yeah.
And we'll invite you back when that happens.
There you go.
So those of you listening, thanks, and we'll catch up with you next week. Take care.